areas of project management, a very great deal has been written about teams, team building, team life cycle, and how as a project manager I need to control and develop the team to provide the deliverables that we need to do for our project sponsors. That's fine. But something that's rather less covered, and I think is vitally important, is that you can actually adapt the format of the team, its very architecture, depending on the kind of work you need to do. You can change the team architecture, the team design during the course of a project, but they tend to stay the same all the way through. And so in this short presentation, I'm going to introduce to you 4 different kinds of team architecture that you can have that you might consider to use for the next project you're going to run. The first kind is called an isomorphic team. An isomorphic team is one which is designed to reflect the destination organization that it serves. For example, I used to work in sales and I was selling financial systems, and in order to attract a customer we needed to convince them that we had a similar format of organization that they had. So for example, they would have a financial accounting department, they would have a user department, they would have IT. They would all have different questions about the software that we're selling. And so we would organize ourselves as having a team leader, and then we would have a financial expert, an accountant, we would have a developer who knew all the technical answers, and then we'd have someone who'd use the system and could explain to the users. So we could match off one to the other, and everyone will be happy and comfortable that we're similar to them, we're the same as them, and we're augmenting their capabilities as such. It can also be used in things like product recall, for example, if a destination client, for example, suddenly needs lots of extra resources of the same kind. The next kind of team, one of my favorites, is called a specialist team. A specialist team is one where each person on the team has the very best specialization in whatever subject they have. My favorite example is perhaps bank robbers. You've seen the caper movies where you have the safe cracker who's great at electronics but not much else. You've got the trapeze artist who can get into the bank and avoid the alarms. You've got the getaway driver who can drive real fast. You've got the mastermind who plans it. Now here's the thing. Each one of these people has a unique specialist skill. They have their moment of fame, and then they have a moment when they're not doing anything. So balancing the workload's a bit tricky. For example, the trapeze artist, his job is to get the safe cracker in front of the safe. Once the safe cracker opens the safe, their job's done. Now, if the safe cracker opens the safe and the alarm goes off, they all run out to the getaway driver, and the getaway driver's just sitting there staring at the air, but suddenly it's their turn, and they have to drive everyone away. And of course, at that point, nobody else can do anything but sit and wait. So a specialist team is where each person has a specialization. Balancing workload is difficult, but I bet it's the kind of team that you use when you first run projects, because you say, I need one of these, and one of these, don't you? Another kind of project organization is called an egoless team, and that's probably the opposite, if there is one, of a specialist team. It's still a group of specialists, but none of them is allowed to rise to the front. For example, if we want to publish a paper as a team or as an organization, there may be several contributors to that paper. Each of them has very, very strong skills or experience, or maybe they're the best in the business. But we need them to combine their efforts to produce the paper, and nobody's going to have their name on it. It's going to be published by the team. For example, if you read The Economist magazine, you'll know that every week this comes out and it doesn't mention any of the correspondents' names at all. It just says your correspondent, because no one is allowed to rise to the front in The Economist. They're all very clever. It's only in the year-end one that they publish the correspondent's name as a kind of a courtesy. The next kind is what's called a surgical team. And a surgical team is the last one I want to cover because I think it's one of the most interesting. Because in a surgical team, there's only room for one person to do the big job that we're going to do. Only one person can fit there. It's called a surgical team because if you imagine an operating theatre, a group of people, you have the surgeon, you have a nurse, you have the anaesthetist, and they're all standing around, and there's only one person who's going to go in, and that's the surgeon, that's the doctor. She's got the experience to go in, but if she says scalpel, it'll be there in her hand. Everyone is there to support that one person. And by the way, that one person at the front may not actually be the project manager, but in a surgical team, we're all there to support that one person. I spent about 5 years going to customers where I was working in a software company. And every day I would go to a hostile company because the customer had got the software didn't work. I worked for the supplier, so therefore it must be my fault. In those days, we couldn't dial in. So I had to drive into the customer, park in the car park, go in there and start coding to find the problem. Now, if I was on my own, it would have been a miserable time. Was anyway. But the good news is that I was getting some help, because at the end of the telephone was all the other team members, developers and support people. I could just call them and they would do anything to help and support me. So in a surgical team, any kind of operation where there's only room for one person, everyone else will support that person. So these are 4 kinds of team arrangement, architecture you can have: isomorphic, egoless, specialist, and a surgical team. Now, as a project manager, as you can probably imagine, the skills you need to display, deploy, and show does vary with each kind of team arrangement. And in another lecture, we'll talk about how we need to adapt ourselves to support those different architectures when they come along, because balancing the workload and keeping people motivated and the very approach you have is very, very different. But let's just consider then, next time you look at a project, as the 4 kinds of team.